There are days when the sky feels distant, days when God's silence weighs more than any word. You pray, speak, ask, and nothing happens. Plans don't move forward, answers don't come, and the soul begins to grow tired. It feels like life has paused, as if God forgot to turn the page, but He hasn't forgotten. He never forgets. What seems like silence to you is work to Him. What feels like waiting to you is construction to Him. Behind the scenes of what you don't understand, God is writing lines that one day will make sense. Every pain, every detour, every tear, every sleepless night, all of it has a purpose. Nothing is wasted in the hands of a God who can turn even what hurts into part of His promise. Life is made of chapters we sometimes don't understand, and there are moments when the author seems to have stopped writing. But it's precisely there, in the space between one paragraph and the next, that He tests the strength of your faith. You may not see it, but God is moving the pieces. He's organizing what seems confusing, aligning what's still scattered, because His timing is different from ours. And what He began, He will finish. As it is written in Philippians 1:6, being confident of this, that He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. This is the certainty that sustains the heart in the midst of silence. God never abandons what He starts. He doesn't stop the story halfway. He writes until the end, with faithfulness, even when the plot seems senseless. You may not understand the current chapter, but you must keep walking, because faith is not about understanding. It's about continuing. And as Hebrews 10:36 says, you need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what He has promised. The promise isn't lost. It's just in process. And the process requires trust. Sometimes God is silent to teach you to hear the sound of faith. Sometimes He delays to protect you from something not yet ready. And sometimes He hides to reveal at the right time. So, when God's silence feels like the end, remember this: He's still writing your story, and the author never abandons the book before the final chapter. Waiting is the ground where faith matures. It's there that God tests the heart, refines intentions, and reveals what truly matters. Many give up during this time, not because they've lost faith, but because they've mistaken silence for abandonment. But God never abandons what He loves. While you think nothing is happening, heaven is moving on your behalf. Angels are working, paths are being aligned, answers are being shaped. Nothing is standing still. God simply works in the invisible before revealing it in the visible. He operates in layers the eyes can't reach. And what seems like delay is, in truth, His mercy holding back what isn't yet ready to be delivered. There are blessings that can only be received when the heart is prepared to sustain them, and that's why the time of waiting is sacred. Behind the scenes of your story, God writes without hurry, but with precision. No comma is placed out of order, no chapter is forgotten, and even when you feel like the book of your life has stopped, the author keeps turning the pages. There are stories in the Bible that were born out of silence. Abraham waited years for a promise that seemed impossible. Joseph endured prisons and rejection before becoming governor. Hannah wept in silence before holding Samuel in her arms. The time of waiting was never wasted time. It was preparation time. Maybe you're in one of those intervals right now, when that space between the request and the answer, between the promise and its fulfillment, and maybe in that interval, doubt whispers that God has forgotten you. But heaven never forgets. God doesn't get distracted. He doesn't delay out of negligence. He delays out of love. Because there are lessons that only bloom in the waiting. There are prayers that only mature over time. And there are miracles that only happen when the heart learns to trust in silence. Behind the waiting, God is still working. And when the right time comes, what seemed like delay will reveal itself as purpose. What seemed like absence will be remembered as care. And what seemed like the end will become a new beginning. God's clock never runs late. It simply doesn't bow to human haste. Because the author of your story doesn't write with anxiety. He writes with eternity. The human mind rushes, but the heart of God has rhythm. While you count days, He builds destinies. While you measure deadlines, He shapes purposes. His time is not our time, and that's why waiting hurts so much. Pain is born from the conflict between the clock of the soul and the timing of heaven. There are moments when everything feels still. You look around and nothing changes. The same prayers, the same promises, the same silence. But God doesn't measure progress through human eyes. He measures it through inner transformation. What you call delay may simply be God's time preparing the ground. Because there are blessings that, if they came too soon, would destroy what they were meant to bless. There are promises that only bloom when the roots of faith are deep enough to sustain them. Joseph waited for years in an unjust prison, not realizing he was being trained to govern. David was anointed king while still tending sheep. Mary received a promise that seemed impossible and had to wait in silence while the world doubted her. Each of them lived the tension between the now and the not yet. And it was in that interval that God made them ready. God's perfect timing is not the one that avoids pain. It's the one that transforms it. He does not rush the process because haste breeds immaturity, and immaturity wastes promises. God doesn't just want to give you something. He wants you to be able to keep what He gives. That's why His timing seems slow but is precise. You are not late. You are being refined. And what looks like delay is, in truth, alignment. Waiting is not an empty hallway. It's a preparation room. And when heaven's clock strikes the right hour, no force will be able to stop what He has ordained, not fear, not the past, not circumstances. Everything happens in God's perfect time. And when that time arrives, no silence remains, and no door stays closed. The story that seemed frozen begins to move, and what seemed lost fits perfectly into place, as if it had been planned all along. God's perfect timing never fails, because He is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and what He has promised, He will fulfill. God's silence is not empty. He speaks even when He is silent. But it takes sensitivity to hear what the heart doesn't want to accept. There are lessons that don't fit into words. There are answers that can only be understood with time. And there are moments when God must be silent so that the soul can learn to listen in a different way. Human beings have grown used to confusing presence with noise. We want signs, quick answers, immediate explanations. But God is not a prisoner of our haste. He reveals Himself in the pauses. And in the pauses, He teaches what the rush of life doesn't allow us to learn. When God is silent, He is shaping us, not with answers, but with patience, not with words, but with character. It's in the silence that pride dissolves, that the heart bends, that faith becomes real. It was so with Job, who lost everything, and yet, without answers, remained steadfast. It was so with Elijah, who waited to hear God in the wind in the fire, and in the earthquake, but found him in a gentle, quiet voice. God speaks differently when he wants to teach us to trust. He doesn't explain, he transforms. And sometimes what you call abandonment is simply a lesson in maturity. God's silence has purpose. It quiets the heart so the soul can grow. It silences the noise of emotion so the spirit can speak. And it helps us understand that faith is not about hearing, it's about remaining. There is no deeper learning than that which is born from divine silence. Because when God is silent, he is not distant. He is closer than ever, working in the unseen, sculpting the inner being of those who trust without understanding. It's in that silence that character aligns with purpose. It's there that dependence is learned. And it's there that the story begins to change, even if the eyes don't yet perceive it. When God is silent, he is teaching, and what is learned in that time becomes the foundation for the rest of the journey. Those who understand the value of silence understand the rhythm of God. True faith is not born on bright days. It's born on long nights, when the heart doesn't understand but still chooses to believe. It's easy to trust when everything is fine, but it's in the darkness that faith reveals its strength. Faith is not a feeling. It's a silent decision to remain even when there are no explanations. It's walking on what seems like empty ground, believing there is solid ground beneath your feet even when you can't see it. It's finding meaning where the world sees only chaos. In the dark, God plants invisible seeds, and while the heart asks why, he answers with purpose. The darkness is not the end. It's the womb where faith is born. Just as a seed must be buried before it blooms, faith must be tested before it shines. Abraham believed against all hope. He waited when everyone said it was too late. And it was exactly then, when the impossible seemed final, that God made the promise come to life. Faith is not the absence of doubt, it's the choice despite it. It's looking at the invisible and saying, even if I don't see, I trust. Every person who has experienced a miracle first walked through a dark night. Faith doesn't remove the valley, but it gives it meaning. It doesn't stop the desert, but it reveals the God who is present in it. And it's in that meeting between human despair and divine hope that true trust is born. Faith blooms in the dark because there it learns the sound of God's voice. There it stops being theory and becomes life. There the believer discovers that it's not necessary to see the path, only to know the author of the road. In silence, in pain, and in waiting, God does not hide. He simply teaches the heart to see without eyes. And when faith matures, the darkness stops being frightening. Because those who trust understand, even when nothing makes sense, the author keeps writing. And the story is not over yet. There are seasons when everything seems out of place. Plans collapse. Paths become confusing. Prayers seem to hit the ground. The mind tries to understand, the heart tries to resist, and the soul wonders where God is amid so much chaos. But the apparent disorder of life is often God's control in action. He sees the whole picture, while we see only fragments. What looks like chaos is alignment. What looks like delay is protection. What looks like loss is redirection. God adjusts the setting of your story in silence. He removes people, moves circumstances, breaks structures that don't fit the new that is coming. And when the ground seems to crumble, it's because He's preparing solid soil for a new beginning. No human script is more precise than the divine plan. God doesn't improvise. He writes ahead of time, prepares with wisdom, and fulfills with faithfulness. And even when it feels like the plot of life has lost direction, he continues directing every scene. Joseph was sold by his brothers and thrown into an unjust prison. Everything around him screamed failure, but God was merely adjusting the setting, taking him from the wrong place to place him at the center of purpose. What seemed like defeat was only the transition between the desert and the palace. It's the same with us. When nothing makes sense, it's a sign that something is being moved in the unseen. God dismantles what is temporary to establish what is eternal. And while the heart insists on understanding, he insists on teaching. God's adjustment is silent but precise. He wastes no pain, makes no wrong turns, and never delays a promise. Everything happens within the perfect time and exact sequence. What seems like chaos today will be a testimony tomorrow. What looks like loss now will later reveal itself as deliverance. And what seems like the end of a chapter is just the beginning of a new purpose. God adjusts the scenery of life when no one is watching. And when everything finally fits together, you realize that nothing was by chance. There was meaning in every pause, purpose in every tear, and love in every silence. There are moments in life when everything takes an unexpected turn. What seemed certain falls apart. What seemed guaranteed disappears, and the plans you built with such care simply stop making sense. In those moments, it's natural to ask, why God? But most of the time, the answer doesn't come right away. When God changes the plans, he's not punishing, he's protecting. What seems like frustration is often deliverance. What seems like a detour is a detour away from what would have hurt you. Because the Father sees what human eyes cannot. He sees tomorrow, and when he changes the route, it's because your destiny must be preserved. Jonah wanted to go his own way, but God redirected him to Nineveh, not as punishment, but for purpose. Joseph dreamed of a throne, but first had to face a pit and the silence of a prison. Mary received news that would change all her plans, and even without understanding, she said, "Let it be done to me according to your will." God changes paths to align destinies, and when he interrupts something, it's not because he's given up. It's because he's guiding the story toward an ending only he can see. Our vision is short, limited to the now. His is eternal, encompassing the whole. How many times has what seemed like a mistake turned out to be the best decision? How many times has what you called loss become the start of something new? God rewrites paths without asking permission, but always with perfect intention. He closes doors so you won't enter places that couldn't sustain your promise. He removes people so his voice can be enough again. And he changes your route to save your destiny. Mature faith understands that God's will may frustrate desires, but it never destroys purpose. It recognizes that the author of the story sees what the character cannot. And even when everything changes, the plan remains firm in the Creator's hands. Time reveals that every change was part of something greater. Nothing was coincidence. Nothing escaped his control. Every detour, every curve, every restart, all of it was part of the salvation story God wrote before you were born. And one day, when you look back, you'll understand. God didn't change your plans to punish you. He changed them to protect you, because he always knew where you needed to arrive. The desert is where human certainties die so that trust in God can be born. It's the space between what's behind and what hasn't yet come. Nothing flourishes there easily. The landscape is dry, the path is long, and the silence is sometimes deafening. But it's precisely in that setting that God reveals what truly sustains. He removes the excess, takes away the support, quiets the noise. And when everything external stops offering safety, the heart learns to trust the invisible. The desert is a school for those who desire the promise. Israel walked through it for 40 years, not because God forgot the way, but because he had to shape the people before giving them the promised land. The desert is not punishment, it's preparation. It's where character is tested, where faith is refined, and where dependence on God becomes real. No man or woman in the Bible reached the promise without first passing through it. Moses knew it before leading. David faced it before reigning. Jesus crossed it before beginning his ministry. The desert is the path every purpose must walk. There are pains that only the desert explains. There are strengths that only the desert reveals. And there are encounters with God that only the desert allows. When everything around dries up, the heart learns to drink from the right source. It's in the heat of scarcity that God's presence becomes the only shelter. And when the heart finally understands this, the desert loses its power to frighten, because the desert has a beginning, middle, and end. And when it ends, no one comes out the same. The one who entered insecure comes out confident. The one who entered wounded comes out healed. The one who entered dependent on circumstances leaves anchored in his presence. The desert was never the end. It's the field where God teaches you to trust. It's the space where he transforms what remains into everything that's needed. And when the journey is over, you realize that the miracle wasn't just arriving, it was enduring. There are prayers that seem forgotten, promises that feel suspended in time. You look to the sky and everything remains the same. Days pass, weeks accumulate, and it feels as if God's clock has stopped. But he is never late. He simply works in silence, in the exact rhythm of eternity. God's apparent delay is, in truth, the interval where the miracle matures. A fruit picked before its time loses its flavor. A promise received without preparation falls apart. That's why God holds back the answer until the heart is ready to receive it. While you wait, he shapes. While you pray, he prepares. While you cry, he writes. There is a process taking place, and that process is part of the miracle. Lazarus died, and Martha believed it was too late. But Jesus arrived on the fourth day, when all human hope was gone, to show that his timing does not depend on man's. What is impossible for the clock is possible for the Creator. He doesn't arrive too early, lest you rely on ease, nor too late, lest you lose faith. He arrives at the exact moment when the purpose is ready to bloom. God never rushes, because he knows that every detail matters. He works while you doubt, acts while you stay silent, and builds while you think everything has stopped. The delay, in fact, is the time of revelation being prepared. Abraham waited decades for a son, and when he finally received him, he understood that the miracle wasn't only Isaac. It was the God who remained faithful through all those years of waiting. Time doesn't weaken the promise. Time purifies the heart of the one who waits. God is never late. He perfects. And when the miracle comes at the right time, it doesn't just change circumstances. It changes the soul of the one who experiences it. What is born from waiting carries the seal of eternity, because what comes in God's timing doesn't get lost, doesn't rush, and doesn't break. A mature miracle isn't the one that happens fast. It's the one that lasts. And when it arrives, you finally understand why you had to wait so long. The delay wasn't neglect. It was preparation. Not every door that closes is a loss. Some are protection. And sometimes something must end for something new to begin. The human heart tends to associate blessing with what opens, what succeeds, what goes according to plan. But often, the greatest demonstration of God's love is in the doors He doesn't allow to open. He sees danger where you see opportunity. He sees detours where you see advancement. And when He closes a door, it's because the path behind it isn't part of your purpose. Joseph faced door after door that closed: his family's home, Potiphar's palace, the forgetfulness of prison. Each closure looked like regression, but in truth, it was direction. Because the only door that needed to open, the throne of Egypt, would open at the exact time without human effort. God's doors don't open in haste. They open with purpose. And the ones that close, no matter how painful, always hold a divine not yet. It's not never. It's simply wait a little longer. Mature faith learns to give thanks for closed doors because it understands that they are also answers. When God prevents, He's protecting. When He refuses, He's redirecting. And when He is silent, it's because He has already answered in another way. Closed doors forge discernment. They teach the heart to distinguish desire from purpose, and they strengthen trust in the God who knows what He's doing, even when everything seems to be falling apart. God's will isn't always the most comfortable, but it's always the safest. It leads through paths man would never choose, yet in the end, they prove to be the only ones capable of fulfilling the promise. One day when you look back, you'll understand why that door never opened. It wasn't the end. It was the detour that saved your destiny. And what looked like rejection was actually love disguised as waiting, because closed doors are also God's answers. And when He closes one, it's because He's already begun preparing another, greater, stronger, and completely aligned with what you were born to live. There are moments when God doesn't repair. He replaces. He doesn't patch what's worn, strengthen what's broken, or insist on what's lost its meaning. He removes. And when He removes, it's not destruction. It's restoration. God isn't afraid to start from scratch. He did it in the beginning, when He formed the world out of chaos. And He still does it in human lives, turning ruins into new beginnings. He isn't intimidated by what's been lost, because He knows what can be born from it. God's removals are never random. He takes away what keeps the new from blooming. Sometimes that means people, plans, or dreams that seemed essential, but in truth had already fulfilled their purpose. It's painful to watch what we love be taken, but it's in that empty space that the new begins to breathe. Israel had to leave Egypt to find the promise. Ruth had to leave Moab to discover Boaz. Peter had to abandon his nets to find his true calling. Every great change in Scripture began with removal. God knows that for something to be born, something must die. And no matter how tightly the heart clings, He knows the exact moment to cut what hinders growth. The same God who allows the pruning is the one who guarantees the blossom. When He takes away, it's because He wants to renew the mind, the vision, the purpose, the faith, because nothing new fits in hearts still full of the old. New wine cannot be stored in old wineskins, and when renewal begins, what once felt like loss becomes freedom. Pain becomes wisdom, longing turns into gratitude, and emptiness gives way to presence. God removes to renew. And when the new comes, everything left behind finally makes sense, not as punishment, but as transition. He doesn't end stories. He rewrites them with greater wisdom. The past isn't a mistake to be forgotten. It's soil where God plants redemption. He doesn't rewrite the story pretending the falls never happened. He turns them into steps toward maturity. Humans try to hide their scars, but God uses them as testimony. He doesn't need to erase what hurt to show how deeply He's healed. A scar is proof that pain existed, but it didn't win. Joseph forgave his brothers because he understood the purpose. What was once betrayal became salvation. David, even marked by his mistakes, was called a man after God's own heart, because repentance turned him into an instrument. Peter, who denied Jesus, was the same one who preached the first message of the gospel. God doesn't erase the past. He redeems it. He steps into the mess of a story and organizes the chaos like an artist who gathers the shards of a broken vase and creates something more beautiful than the original. Nothing is wasted. Not the fall, not the repentance, not the time that seemed lost. When your perspective matures, you realize that everything worked together to draw you closer to God. The pain taught dependence. The losses taught faith. And even your mistakes revealed how His love is greater than your guilt. The past doesn't define you. It prepares you. And what once felt like shame will one day become a message. Because God never wastes a story that is surrendered into His hands. The true turning point doesn't happen when everything changes on the outside, but when the heart surrenders on the inside. God doesn't need strength. He needs surrender. It's when pride goes silent and the soul admits, "Alone, I no longer know what to do." Surrender isn't giving up. It's complete trust. It's the moment when a person stops fighting against the author and begins walking with Him. And it's at that point that the story changes direction. Job only saw double after he bowed before God's sovereignty. Jonah only found peace when he accepted his calling. Mary only saw the impossible happen after she said, "Let it be done to me according to your will." Surrender opens the doors to a new beginning. What was blocked begins to flow. What was heavy becomes light. Because God writes best on the pages that man hands over blank. There is a silent power in surrender. It doesn't promise ease, but it guarantees purpose. And when the heart bends, heaven moves. Everything that once seemed confusing starts to make sense, and what once hurt becomes direction. Surrender is the point where the story stops being about survival and becomes about mission. And it's there that the new chapter begins, not with noise, but with peace. And now, after everything, what once seemed like loss has become growth. What once looked like delay has revealed itself as protection. And what once felt like silence was God writing in the right time. Life was never about understanding. It was always about trusting. Faith is the bridge between the painful chapter and the glorious ending. God hasn't forgotten you. He's simply writing at a rhythm your heart is still learning to follow. The author never abandons the book before finishing it. He doesn't give up on his characters, even when they lose their way. He rewrites, restores, renews, and every line he writes carries enough grace to sustain the next step. Everything that's been removed, transformed, and rebuilt until now was part of a story you couldn't yet understand. Now begins the time of revelation. The page turns, the purpose is fulfilled, and the heart realizes that God was never distant. He was just working in silence. The prayers that seemed forgotten were being answered in another way. The tears that felt useless were watering the ground of the miracle, and the time that seemed lost was, in truth, the time of preparation. The story isn't over. There are still chapters of promise, of healing, of new beginnings, and each one will be written by the same hand that sustained you through the hardest days. Because God is still writing your story, and when He writes, no mistake is final, no pause is wasted, and no ending is sad, only the beginning of a new page filled with purpose. If this message touched your heart, don't let it end here. Words inspire, but faith grows when it's shared. There are many more stories, reflections, and truths that God has placed on our hearts to share with you. And each video is another chance to remember that He is still present, even on the days when everything feels silent. So, if this message spoke to you, like this video and subscribe to the channel. That way, you can keep walking with us on this journey of faith and hope. And remember, the story God is writing in your life is unique, precious, and still unfolding. Maybe this video was just one page of what He is about to reveal. Thank you for listening until the end. May the peace of God remain with you, today, tomorrow, and through every chapter still to come.